Hello, I'm Martha Engber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease polarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who've tuned in. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the Common Ground movement. Every month, I try to do a citizen spotlight to cast a light on other Americans on both sides of the political spectrum who are working hard to decrease polarization. Today I'm talking with Jason Vadnos. Hello, Jason.
Hello, Martha. Great to be here.
Thanks for joining me. Jason Vadnos is a junior at Vanderbilt University, passionate about strengthening youth interest in civic engagement. He's the campus leader for a pilot program launched this year by More Like Us, a national nonprofit that works to correct the dangerous misperceptions that people on different sides of the political spectrum have of one another. After college, he hopes to continue his work on depolarization and civic engagement through a career in either higher education or the nonprofit sector, where he can provide students with the skills and knowledge they need to revitalize our democracy. Currently, Jason serves as both an Obama Chesky Voyager Scholar of Public Service and a Riley's Way Call for Kindness Fellow. Let's dive in. I recently interviewed James Cohen, the co-founder and executive director of More Like Us. And when did you get connected to the nonprofit organization and why?
Yeah, great question. And thank you again for inviting me into this space, Martha. I first met James 2 summers ago. That would be in the summer of 2023. I was spending my time in Washington, D.C., where James is based. And at the time, I was interning with my university's Office of Federal Relations, essentially our lobbying arm for the national government. At the time, I had sort of a nascent interest in questions of civil discourse and dialogue because I'd recently gotten involved in an initiative run by my university, Dialogue Vanderbilt, which is designed to help provide students with the skills and knowledge they need to have productive civil conversations with one another. So I was sort of seeking organizations in the DC area that were sort of committed to these tenets of engaging in productive conversation and reducing political polarization through that methodology. Came across James, and we had the opportunity to meet in person that summer. And so since then, we've been in sort of regular touch over those past 2 years. And yes, recently launched a new initiative.
Well, as mentioned, the organization is currently piloting
Yep.
the program, and it's called Let's Be Civil. And
Yes.
I should say that civil is an acronym for of SVL for Stories, Values, and Listen. As the
Mhm.
campus leader for that program, can you tell us more about how it works and why it's necessary, or if it's
Yeah,
necessary?
absolutely. Yeah, so Let's Be Civil was really co-designed between James and I and draws from a sort of vast array of research on human psychology and politics and conversation, and is essentially a really easy, memorable, repeatable slogan that people can use when they're having contentious conversations across difference. You leverage stories, values, and listening in order to have more productive discourse. And so we were interested in bringing this to the higher education sector, which over the past several years has faced a myriad of challenges from the Israel and Palestine protests to questions of sort of a lack of conservative voices or viewpoints being uplifted on college campuses. And so universities across the country are launching dialogue initiatives, dialogue programs, like the one I mentioned here at Vanderbilt. However, James and I quickly identified that those initiatives are oftentimes limited in scope and scale. They often engage students in hours-long workshops. They only appeal or engage to a very small sector of the campus population and require sustained engagement. And so we're wondering, what is an effective way to really teach many people, many students simultaneously, how to have better conversations, depolarizing dialogue? And we use Let's Be Civil as that framework. So on campus, our main investment is in mass media and mass messaging campaigns. So work and information that is going to reach many students at once through social media, through flyers, through tabling in public spaces. All of these are avenues through which we can spread the message of Let's Be Civil, simple, memorable acronym for having better conversations, to a wide variety of students who don't have to self-select to engage in a workshop or an event that is being hosted by a university dialogue program.
So what you're saying is that if it is too involved it self-selects for a very small part of the population who has the time and interest. So you want to get to a wider population, I guess.
Precisely.
And so, what are some of the messages that you are putting forth? What
Yeah, I
is it
mean,
like? Have a great day, or let's be civil, or what?
yeah, I mean, Let's Be Civil is the cornerstone message in and of itself, and sort of embodies, again, both that practical strategy for conversation, engage in storytelling, use stories as a point of connection, and to share sort of who you are and what you believe, relate to one another's values in order to have a effective and productive conversation, in order to have a persuasive argument. You need to know what the other person cares about and appeal to that. And also importantly, listening, right? You need to be able to understand and deeply care about what the other person in your conversation is saying. So on social media graphics or flyers, we will literally have a big graphic that says, having a difficult conversation, be civil, and use stories, appeal to one another's values, and listen. And so we also do share some other messages with related processes, including, the other side is more civil than you think. They're curious. They want to have common ground with you. But really, Let's Be Civil serves as the cornerstone of our framework.
Well, what changes have you been seeing, if any?
Yeah, so that's something we're actually in the midst of investigating right now. We are piloting as part of this program some survey testing to sort of identify what the student dialogue environment looks like here at Vanderbilt, where the pilot is being run. And we are running sort of this pre-test to assess dialogue skills, habits, and attitudes, as well as levels of affective political polarization among the campus. And then, as we are in the midst of our marketing and messaging campaign, we're then going to run a post test, which is identifying how students who have come across our messages had their ideas changed in terms of their willingness to have conversations with folks of different beliefs, in terms of their actual behavior. So, are they engaging more with the other side? And are they less fearful of, folks from a different party? All of these sorts of questions. So we're doing some of that survey methodology right now. We don't have any data analysis results to share yet, but it is currently happening here at Vanderbilt's campus.
Have you actually personally shared any stories? Are there any like videos that you're circulating which shows two people and they're like talking to each other and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. So Instagram is one of our primary means of engagement. It's sort of the dominant youth social media platform. It's often used on Vanderbilt's campus to share news and updates about things going on at the university. It's what most of our student organizations and clubs use as a way to share information and announcements. And so we are right now building out sort of our social media content to include man on the street style interviews, right, where we're having a quick conversation about a politically divisive topic, but using the civil framework to do so in a meaningful and productive way where both people feel good about engaging in that conversation and thought that it was helpful. We also obviously have, videos of what is, Let's Be Civil, why does this work, what's the theory and research behind it. But we are engaging right now in sort of building out that social media presence.
Have you seen anything anecdotally which is showing you people changing their perceptions toward one another? Can you give us a story of that, perhaps? Is it a roommate or somebody down the hall or somebody you work with? And if so, what did it look like for them? I guess what transformations have you been witnessing, if any?
Yeah, absolutely. So, universities are an interesting place where they're a center for sort of hot button issues to come up on campus. Most recently, here at Vanderbilt, we were one of 9 universities selected by the federal government to potentially sign on to this proposed federal compact, which has been in the news for a few months now. And it was essentially proposing a variety of university policy changes in exchange for preferential treatment for federal grant funds. As one of the universities initially selected to participate potentially in this compact, there was a quick and explosive student response where a large section of the student body was, we have to resist the compact, reject it, say no. Other students were, well, maybe we should engage in conversation, maybe we should negotiate. Some said, hey, look, this compact actually sounds like a great idea. We should have more money coming into the university from the federal government. So there was a hot button issue, quickly divided the campus population. There was protests, marches, etc. And so we engage students using the civil framework and civil discourse and dialogue methodologies to have a conversation about why do we believe that the compact is a good or a not good thing, And how can we work together to think about a productive way for the university to respond? So we brought together, literally in informal conversations, students from across perspectives in sort of dialogue events being hosted on campus through tabling outside of the university's main cafeteria, and had them engage in conversation, basically presented them with a super simple framework of how do you have a better conversation about a politically divisive issue? And students, after that conversation, we did sort of a group debrief and reported they felt that they were better able to understand how somebody could believe a different perspective or point of view. They had a better sense of how others' lived experiences and backgrounds contributed to the things that they thought. And they also felt that there wasn't immediate hostility or tension, and that now, folks who, quote unquote, support the compact aren't maybe evil, right, in the same way that folks who want to reject the compact aren't evil or hateful or stupid or lazy or ignorant, but they're just people, and we're all students trying to figure out the best next step.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about the
Yeah.
perception gap, and you've touched on it right there. I think a
Hmm.
lot of people are not familiar with some of these terms.
Yeah.
And so if you could tell us what that perception gap is and give us a example of it,
Yep.
if you would.
Absolutely. So perception gap is the bread and butter of More Like Us's work. And essentially, it's a phenomenon where individuals believe that those on the opposite aisle or sort of across the aisle, an opposite party, have more extreme political viewpoints than they actually do. For instance, there's lots of studies, and actually on the More Like Us website, there's a whole list of sort of topics where the perception gap is prevalent. But for instance, say the vast majority of Democrats believe that, Republicans, 80% of Republicans have a sort of belief that there should be no gun control or no control laws. But in reality, about only 50% of Republicans believe, or 40% of Republicans, I won't remember the exact statistics off the top of my head, forgive me. You can go to the More Like Us website for that info. But in reality, only 40 to 50% of Republicans believe that there should be limited gun control laws. And actually, most Republicans believe in common sense gun control, like safe ammo storage and these sorts of provisions. So that right there is the perception gap. One side of the aisle believes the other side of the aisle is more extreme on their policy views and their politics than they actually are.
And I don't think a lot of people actually believe that, do
Yeah.
they, until they see the statistics.
Well, yeah, I mean, the truth is that we are all trapped in our own sort of partisan echo chambers, and we are told that the other side all believes this one thing. They are a sort of unanimous belief in whatever policy perspective or viewpoint it may be. And so it's easy to feel, especially with limited conversation and connections with folks across the aisle, that everybody is more extreme than they actually are. But the statistics show that that's not true. And if you actually do engage in conversation with people with different beliefs and viewpoints, you'll see that's not the case.
Have you ever experienced a perception gap yourself? And if so, what turned you around?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's inevitable, right? Everybody experiences the perception gap because none of us have perfect information, and we all believe that others are more extreme than they actually are. I'll say one thing that sort of was meaningful for me in the past 2 years was related to the question of institutional neutrality. So this is a higher education policy where universities state that they are not going to take any public stances on political or social issues not directly related to the mission of the university. I, for one, have some qualms about institutional neutrality. I think that, like many things, it is good in theory and as a concept, but has some difficulties when being put into practice. And I believe that folks who were, ardent supporter of institutional neutrality were really just trying to perhaps platform viewpoints which were divisive, right, or viewpoints which were hateful. But I had the opportunity to sit in a dialogue circle with about 20 other students on campus. And we had a robust 90-minute conversation about institutional neutrality, why we believed in it or didn't believe in it, what our qualms and our perspectives were. And I quickly realized that most folks actually had a much more nuanced perspective on the issue than I had initially thought. And I also found that most people approached it with good intentions, right? Like we all just want to improve our community. We want to make the world a better place. And it's easy to feel that, oh, if you believe this thing or oh, if you support this policy, you just don't know. But in reality, they had lots of facts, information, anecdotal experiences, and data. And so I sort of found that while I still, maybe didn't shift my viewpoint very much, I had a better understanding of the other side's beliefs and why they believe what they do about institutional neutrality.
And if you have that information, then I suppose it makes you better able to negotiate solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need a semblance of common ground in order to work together and collaborate towards action. And if you believe that folks across the aisle are incredibly extreme in their beliefs and that you don't have any common ground, why would you ever take a step forward to try and create it, right? Only by knowing that there isn't actually that perception gap in reality, are you going to be able to work together towards solutions that work for everyone.
Hmm. Well, I was curious, how do you think your generation differs politically than other generations,
That's a
presumably
great
older
question.
generations?
Yeah, Gen Z is so interesting. And there's lots of data and reporting going on about this because everyone wants to know the answer to that question, right? What is Gen Z thinking? What's the future of democracy in our country? I will say, personally and anecdotally, I think Gen Z, compared to older generations, is just as, if not more, passionate about public issues and community problems and the global challenges that we're facing. But the kinds of action that Gen Z is engaging in to solve them looks very different than in older generations. So, for instance, one of the sort of main indicators historically of civic engagement has been voting rates. And for decades, the youth voting rate has been pretty abysmal.
Mm.
And when you look at, students, for example, less than, 50%, 40% of students engage even in national elections, right? And the Gen Z vote is, pretty low compared to other folks. That being said, what I have seen is that while we may not be at the ballot box as much as older folks, we still are creating change through social media activism, through engaging in community-based problem solving. We are deeply passionate about the issues that our world is facing, but we are interfacing with them in different ways than the generations before us.
Is it possible that the passion comes from just being confronted with so much more, perhaps like other eras, the 60s and so forth, where there's just a lot more button issues?
I mean, I think obviously having large global challenges looming, like climate change, for example, is pressing for our generation. But I think more than anything, it's access to information, right? In our modern age, with social media, with the internet, it's constantly at our fingertips, all the things going wrong in the world, and also all the problems that we need to solve. Whereas historically, you would maybe hear about some of the large national issues through public radio or public television channels, but really, we were much more rooted in what things going on in our community and our local areas. And so I think having access to information, the instantaneous transfer of knowledge through digital spaces is enabling the younger generation to be simply more aware of everything that is happening in our world. And as a result, having more to combat, they want to change more as well.
Are they also as aware of how this information is spun, depending on who puts it out?
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge. Media literacy is certainly something that young people need to invest and engage in. I think that most Gen Zers understand and are skeptical of most individuals who purport to, produce fact-based news. They understand that everyone has agendas, political agendas, and that they're trying to advance particular narratives regarding, depending on what news channel you're watching, depending on what social media content creator you are engaging with. And so I think that Gen Z, broadly speaking, has a pretty good understanding of misinformation and disinformation, especially in the AI era with deep fakes,
Mm.
right? And I think most young people have a sense that these things are happening in the world and that we need to be wary and critical of all the information that we are consuming.
Well, as a person who listens regularly and is good at it and is doing a program with it,
Mm.
what are you hearing about the worries of your generation? What is really at the forefront?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of worries, as many generations do. I would say a couple of them are that democracy isn't working and hasn't worked for us. So many people my age, we grew up in an era where politics was incredibly divisive, where bipartisanship didn't really exist, and where politics was constantly just a really ugly battle, right? And also where democracy and government has been literally less effective than in previous generations, when it comes to, for example, the number of bills being passed in Congress, right? Historically low. And so what our generation feels is that government isn't working for us, and we need to be able to fight for ourselves, right? So a sense of independence, of community-based problem solving, of mutual aid efforts. I think that Gen Z is also deeply worried about the existence and survival of something like the American dream, and like our current economy, right? I know everyone harps on it, but especially when you're talking about, youth home ownership, right? Like for most people my age, the idea of ever being able to own a home is such a foreign concept, simply because it's comparatively from 50 years ago incredibly expensive and unrealistic. I also think that Gen Z is just worried about a lot of the global crises that we're facing. I mentioned climate change a few minutes ago, and like most people my
Mhm.
age are thinking very critically about what's going to be happening to me and my family in 40 to 50 years. So, yeah, I think there's a lot in our minds, but I'm hopeful that we are working to change it.
Well, I would love to communicate regularly with people of your generation and younger
Mm.
generations in general, So I wanted to know if you had an idea about what could be done, if anything, to improve intergenerational discourse.
Oh, that's a great question. I will say there are some folks who are doing amazing work on intergenerational connection. Um, so I think a couple of things need to be done, at least from our sort of perspective as Gen Z. One is that there's a really large narrative about Gen Z being apathetic, Gen Z not caring, Gen Z being disengaged. And I think most young people know that that's not true, but we're constantly told that by the media, by folks who are older than us. And so if someone comes to the table and says, hey, look, you and your generation don't care about what's going on in the world, why would we want to have a conversation with you and work towards a solution, right? So I think breaking down that narrative of apathy is super important. I also think understanding that Gen Z grew up in a radically different environment, technologically, socially, economically, than our past generations is so important as well. So, there's been lots of reports about Gen Z is impossible to work with in the workplace, right? We can't get through to them. They have different habits, right? And recognizing that that is not necessarily because Gen Z is any worse at working than other generations are. We're just different, right? And so coming at it with a legitimate desire to understand, to recognize that our generation has different challenges and different environment growing up, and to say we value your voice. We want to work with you is so important, because lots of young people feel that their voices are not being heard, especially when we look at something like our government and who is running it, folks who are 70 and 80 and folks who are not necessarily representing the youth voice, right? So I'd say all of those things contribute to intergenerational dialogue.
If you ever have a program and get involved in that, please do let me know because I think that would be
Yeah,
fascinating.
absolutely.
What do you think would greatly decrease polarization in America? You must have ideas since you're so enmeshed in this
Oh.
field. Go
That's
ahead,
a
start
great
listing.
question. Yeah, that's a big question, right? So I think that there's three kind of answers I want to provide. One is, More Like Us's work on the perception gap is showing that there's not as much polarization on issues and policies as we think there is. There is, however, lots of affective polarization, right? Belief that the opposite side of the aisle is evil, that they're the enemy, that they don't know anything. The question of how do we solve it is a very tricky one. I think that there is, as always, no one clear solution. There has to be a variety of interventions at a variety of scales and a variety of places. I think, though, one of the critical foundations has to be education. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing this work with Let's Be Civil at a college campus, because we have to teach people how to engage with people who are different from them, right? So affective polarization and this belief that the other side is hateful, evil, and ignorant is a result of a inability to interact meaningfully with someone from a different background, lived experience, identity, or perspective. The only way that we can bridge that gap, that we can depolarize, is by literally providing people with the skills and the knowledge to do so. We have to teach people these are the ways in which you can engage across difference productively. These are the ways in which you can have a better conversation about a hot button issue and not walk away feeling unheard or angry or dissatisfied. So education, I think, is really the heart of combating the polarization crisis. And that doesn't just take place in schools, right? It's like, I'm a student, I'm passionate about doing work on my campus, but education can happen in the workplace. Education can happen in the home, it can happen at your local church or community center. And all of these sort of communal spaces that we have, we should be investing in programs which teach people how to have better conversations, how to engage across difference, and most importantly, why doing so is beneficial to society, right? Because if
Mhm.
you're, maybe you know how to have a great conversation, but if you don't actually believe that that conversation will lead to meaningful change, you still aren't going to engage, and polarization is not going to be reduced. So we have to show people examples of, effective ways in which people have worked together across difference to create something positive in their community.
Do you think that effort would be enough to push back against the tremendously overwhelming negative messaging coming from conflict entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean that's a big challenge, right? I mean, I think in the ideal world, if we could reach all Americans at scale with education and depolarize that way, I think that we would have an effective solution. But we also know that that's not the way that reality works, and that conflict entrepreneurs and our political elites drive the conversation, drive the narrative. They are role models for our behavior. And so, another thing that we have to do to depolarize is to change the incentive structure, right? We have to change the way that social media algorithms work to promote, content that is showing productive engagement across division and people working together rather than sort of hateful and spiteful rants, right? We need to encourage our political elites to invest and engage in working across the aisle and investing in bipartisan solutions and collaborating and not calling each other evil in order to really meaningfully change messaging. So I think that's another really critical part as well, and goes to show, as I mentioned before, that we have to tackle this through a variety of different solutions. There's not going to be one clear answer.
Mhm. Well, how hopeful are you that your work will have impact?
Mm,
And what gives you that hope? I mean, you have
yeah.
a naturally positive attitude, nature.
Try to.
But what besides that? I mean, what gives you hope? What have you seen? What have you
Yeah.
heard?
I mean, I think what gives me hope is seeing the everyday interactions that I have with my peers on campus and beyond campus, right? Literally having the conversations that I want others to engage in across the aisle and seeing that, yeah, young people who disagree with me, who come from a totally different place than I do, also want to improve the world. We are all working on this together. And so simply the day-to-day interactions, working across division, is so impactful and meaningful and gives me hope that if I and someone that I radically disagree with can work together to solve a problem in our community or on our campus, anyone can do it, right? I also think that there's been, in the past few months, some great reporting and research which is showing that Gen Z does care deeply about their communities, right? I mentioned earlier this narrative of Gen Z apathy, but we are seeing some counterpoints to that. And I think that understanding at a macro scale and statistically that Gen Z is deeply passionate about public issues, that we do want to change and improve the world, that gives me hope. That knowing that folks across the country, way beyond my campus and my hometown, are thinking about these things and engaging in these issues is wonderful. And we're seeing a lot of, youth-led solutions, youth-led projects, these sorts of things, which are improving communities every day. And so reading about that, seeing that gives me so much hope, as do conversations like this, right? Knowing that there are people from all over that care deeply about our voice and want Gen Z to move towards a better world is so meaningful to me as well.
I have really, really enjoyed talking with you. And again, if you come up with an intergenerational um, uh, program, put me on the
Yeah.
list because I think you're right. And I think that that is super important that we all talk to each other. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've seen is a lack of youth voice in any of the programs I've seen and been involved
Hmm.
with. So
Hmm.
good on you for that.
Yeah.
So, and thanks again to those of you who listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, vigilantpositivity.wordpress.com. Please join our cause.